Welcome back to the Jim Leach Show on 970 WMAY, the news and talk of Springfield. Once a month on the show, at least, we'd like to check in with Congressman Rodney Davis to get a sense as to how things are unfolding on Capitol Hill, the issues that could be affecting us in the months to come. This morning is that morning. Congressman Davis joins us live here. Congressman, good morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're checking in from D.C. this morning?
Actually, no. We fly back out today.
I see.
I'm in Illinois still and going to catch a flight later this morning.
Good that you weren't out there yesterday. It sounds like a very tense and harrowing day out in Washington, D.C. with the shooting at the Navy Yard, only about a mile or so from the U.S. Capitol. And we've gone through this again now, another mass shooting incident. Any reaction to that happening right there in a city that you know so well?
You know, my thoughts and my prayers go out to the families of the victims and all those who were in the midst of that situation. Just a tragedy. And, you know, I like everyone else in the country, is waiting for the investigation to take place and find out what motivated this killer or killers.
You know, it's going to raise a lot of the old debate again about, are there things we ought to be doing differently? We've seen so many of these incidents, and it's going to continue to just renew this debate. From where you sit, are there things we need to be looking at? I realize we don't know a lot about what motivated this particular incident, where the individual in question got the weaponry that he used, but should we be doing more to try to address some of these issues, whether from a firearm standpoint, a mental health standpoint? Where do we go from here?
You know, this harkens back to the discussion we had in January and February after Newtown. And I hope the president and his administration doesn't miss the boat again. And we can really focus on a national discussion that's going to take in all aspects of these crimes and find out, obviously, after the investigation into this particular crime, and maybe get more answers. I just hope that they don't use it as another opportunity to just push their own partisan political agenda, and I'm urging them not to.
Let's move on to some other items this morning, Congressman. I want to start with Syria, where, of course, the last time we spoke, it looked like we might be heading toward a real showdown, maybe even military intervention there. Now that has cooled off considerably. There is talk of a deal for Syria to give up its chemical weapons. Is this headed to, in your view, the right outcome here? And did the president ultimately get to where we needed and wanted to be on this situation?
Well, I think he was taken to where we needed and wanted to be, but by kicking and screaming. This was, unfortunately, a situation, one of my first instances when we had to think about sending men and women, American men and women, into the battlefield. And even if it's a ridiculously small strike, like Senator Kerry put it, it still puts American lives in danger. And what frustrated me, Jim, and I was at the White House last Thursday talking to Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough with some other freshman Republicans. They did not engage Congress as to how any mission they were planning was going to actually have the objective of stopping Bashar al-Assad from using chemical weapons again. And that's what frustrated me and the members that I serve with, because there just was no plan of action. And I think hopefully they've learned. And one of my messages that I sent to Mr. McDonough that day was, hey, this is a great meeting, great dialogue, but it's 2 weeks too late. So let's learn from this and let's do the same thing. Let's have these same dialogues on some very important domestic issues too. And I think we can come to some common sense solutions.
Can't the argument be made, though, that even the threat of these strikes seems to have gotten Assad to, one, admit they have chemical weapons, and two, to at least now start to make a public gesture that he wants to divest himself of them? So doesn't that suggest that this really was a strategy that could have worked here? If he was that fearful of just the prospect of strikes, the actual strikes itself would have certainly had some deterrent effect, too.
Oh, boy, I wish you know what, I'll give credit to anybody that actually accomplishes the task of making sure that this guy doesn't use those weapons again. I think we all agreed out in Washington that he did use chemical weapons. So just admitting he had them, I don't think was a big step. But the fact of the matter is, throughout this entire process, throughout the entire debate over Syria, there were so many mixed messages. And if this was the strategy from the beginning from this White House, well, then they're a lot more coy than what I thought they were.
I want to make sure I'm clear about this because there's a lot of debate in political circles, still people who are not convinced that it actually was the Assad regime, that it might have been the rebels who used chemical weapons. But you say there's really no room for doubt. It was Assad and his regime that used chemical weapons in that suburb of Damascus.
I believe that Bashar al-Assad and his regime were the ones that used chemical weapons in that attack. Yes, I do. And I don't think there's much doubt about that among my colleagues. It's not about whether or not he used them. It's about how to make sure he doesn't use them again. And the threat of the military strike, as the size of that military strike, the scope of that military strike, and the timing of that military strike continuously changed depending on who you talk to in the administration, it left us the only option, which is to trust Vladimir Putin to be the peacemaker.
And from the sound of that, you don't trust Putin in this case. So is this deal that we're being talked about here, do you not have a lot of faith that this is the real thing?
You know, the sad part is I probably have more faith in Putin negotiating a solution to actually achieve the objective of making sure that he doesn't use chemical weapons again, more so than I did the so-called ridiculously small strike that the Obama administration was planning.
Let's move on to some other issues this morning. One of the things that I know that you probably got a lot of strong opinions on, the U.S. EPA set this week to roll out new regulations pertaining to future coal-fired power plants that a lot of folks are saying could be the end of all new coal plant construction in this country. Your thoughts on that and the impact it may have on Illinois coal?
That's going to have a huge impact. I mean, we've already seen what government regulations can do to coal country here in central Illinois. I live in coal country. When I was growing up in Taylorville, our largest employer was Peabody Mine Number 10. One of the reasons I ran for Congress was the impact that it had on me when I saw in the early 90s that a signature on a piece of paper in Washington can actually make sure that families no longer have their jobs here in central Illinois. It frustrates me because there are ways that we can work together to make coal cleaner, and we have reduced emissions in this country over the last 3 decades out of our coal-fired power plants. And what it does is it reduces an energy source. It reduces our access as Americans to low-cost power. And frankly, the only result is going to be in higher utility costs for every single American.
We're talking with Congressman Rodney Davis this morning, live on 970 WMAY. Of course, the folks who are concerned about the environmental impact of coal say that liquid natural gas is really a cheaper and more environmentally safe alternative to coal. Is this just the parade of progress? Passing it by? Coal is a very old form of producing energy here, and is it just time to accept that the times are changing?
Well, first of all, let's harken back to a few years ago when natural gas was at all-time highs and people were worried about their heating bills. You know, the same environmental groups who want to close down all of our coal-fired power plants also want to stop us from having access to the largest supply of natural gas that we've ever had because they want to ban fracking. So it just doesn't make sense here either. But one question I would ask the residents of Springfield, CWLP just upgraded their power plant. It's a coal-fired power plant. What are they going to do when they're still paying the higher rates for that construction project and the federal government says you can't burn it? You're going to have to choose something else. I think it's a very legitimate concern right here in central Illinois, which is why we really have to watch what's going on in Washington because it may have a dramatic impact on those who use CWLP as their supplier of power.
Now, just so I'm clear, my understanding was that the regulations coming out this week only pertain to future plant construction, not to existing power plants. But we are expecting more regulation on existing coal-fired plants probably within the next year or two?
I think this administration will continue its attack on coal and coal-fired power plants until President Obama leaves the White House. It's a concern because there's going to come a day when CWLP is going to have to upgrade their facility again. And the ratepayers are going to have to pay more or they're going to have to pay less. And keep in mind, if we're not able to burn coal, American coal here in this country, to be able to burn coal at CWLP, we're going to have to get that coal somewhere. And I hope and pray that we never in this country, with the vast resources of coal that we have, ever have to import that.
Let's talk about now the possibility of a government shutdown. We've got a looming debate over the debt ceiling. There's a lot of back and forth negotiation and discussions about how we're going to navigate all of this, and time is running out pretty rapidly here. What's your best estimate as to where this is all headed?
I think I've said all along, I don't see a government shutdown. I'm not for a government shutdown. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't take place, even though government really doesn't shut down. It still operates on a limited basis. And that's the message I try to send to folks that talk to me about it, is that it's still going to be operational, but we can't afford to make our men and women who are protecting our freedoms, who serve overseas, worry about whether or not they're going to be able to make their mortgage payment. And that's what frustrates me about this whole debate, because it affects real people when we don't work together and come up with some common sense solutions.
Well, one of the big holdups still seems to be about a demand that Obamacare be defunded in any agreement on the debt ceiling or any agreement on a final budget resolution or a continuing resolution. Are Republicans willing to drop that demand, which clearly isn't going anywhere in the Senate or with the White House, in order to avoid that government shutdown?
Well, I wouldn't speak too fast on delaying Obamacare. You know, I've said all along, anybody that knows me, I'm for defunding, I'm for delaying, I'm for repealing, I'm for replacing. The president himself is the one who came up with the idea to delay the employer mandate. We passed a bill to codify that. I hope that the Senate takes that bill up, because it's only doing what President Obama wanted, and we don't have to then worry about court challenges to his authority to do that or not. But we also passed a bill to delay the individual mandate. I just think as we've seen this roll out, as Max Baucus, a Democrat senator from Montana, has said, it's a train wreck. Let's pull back. Let's make sure that we get the answers in place as to how this is going to affect every American, including me and my family, since I get to go on the exchange in October or in January. I get to begin looking at the exchange as all Americans do this fall. Let's make sure that we are not going to be impacted by the problems that are occurring right now. And that's why I think that there's opportunity to come together to find that solution. I just hope both sides want to be able to do that.
And as far as the debt ceiling discussion as part of this, do you think that will go through, or do we run a risk of a default there?
I don't see the risk of a default. I remind folks often when the debt ceiling issue gets brought up that the debt ceiling was increased back in late January, early February, along with the no budget, no pay provisions that we put in the Senate and forced the Senate to actually outline their vision for America, which was a budget that never balances. That debate will also take place, and I hope, just like the last time that the debt ceiling was raised, that the debt that the money can only be used to pay already obligated costs, rather than going out and exponentially doubling down on more government spending in Washington, which is what we have to roll back.
How quickly do you think these things are going to be resolved? October 1st is the deadline, unless we do pass a continuing resolution. Can we get this all done? Because there's only, 5 session days between now and then?
Now, keep in mind, Jim, I've been here 8 months, and I, like the rest of everyone else, is sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of all these deadlines. So likely, I got to be honest with you, likely it'll probably come down to about 11:59 on September 30th before we finally get a solution. And that's part of the process that both parties are at fault at. That just frustrates me to no end, because that's what gives us these ridiculous policies like sequestration. That's what gives us the ridiculous fiscal cliffs. And I have been a voice, along with many in my caucus, to get back to regular order, get back to where individual members of Congress have a say in the appropriations process. That's where we can make some policy changes that the American people are demanding. That's where we can make sure that we actually reprioritize how Washington spends money. Because you got to remember, there are people in Washington right now that have been there for 2 terms or 1 term that have never gone through an entire appropriation process. They look at a continuing resolution as the norm, and that is not what our forefathers put in place. That is not what history has said works for this country, and we've got to change that very, very quickly.
Congressman Rodney Davis joining us live this morning. He's headed back to D.C. later today, and we'll see if his optimistic thoughts about budget and debt ceiling and so on and so forth can all be realized here in the next 2 weeks. Congressman, thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it.